I will say this at the beginning. I shouldn't. I probably shouldn't say these things, but I'm going to. My outline this evening is, to me, weird. As I studied for this message and wrote it out and so forth, I spent a considerable amount of time looking at my outline and praying about it. You know, kind of a, God, this feels all disconjointed and strange to me, but I'm confident this is what he wants me to preach this evening. So, like I said, you probably didn't need to know that, except for if I at some point portray that, you know why. Ruth chapter 1. I'm going to read a significant amount to start us off, just to make sure we are kind of understanding the context of where we are, and then we will get started this evening. Ruth chapter 1, starting in verse 1. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelled there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them. And the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how the Lord had visited the people in giving them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house, and the Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. And the Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters, why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have an husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have an husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them for having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. And they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. And she said, Behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. And I'll stop there for right now. Let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. Lord, I pray that you will use this time tonight that we have in your word. I pray that you will speak through me this evening, Lord, and that you will use the message in our lives tonight. And pray in your name. Amen. You can go ahead and be seated. I know that we read a pretty large portion to start us off. I think that kind of helps us sometimes to get a little more context as to what's going on here. I'm going to give a little bit of background before we get moving forward. But I want to look at this in our series, looking at choices. I want to look a little bit at this decision by Ruth to stay with her mother-in-law, the choices she made. But we're going to get there in a minute, but background first, but that's kind of where we're going to get to with this. The passage makes it clear, verse 1, that this is in the same time frame as the Judges. So last week, I was in the book of Judges in this series, so it's in the same time frame as that. I did a little bit of research this week on this, and just being perfectly honest, nowhere in the Bible does it tell us exactly where in the Judges this falls. But there's some idea in Jewish history and most scholars agree with this idea. Whether, not all, they never all do, but most of them at least will agree to this one, that the book of Ruth falls, according to most, between the 3rd and 4th chapter of Judges, which would mean that this is going on with Naomi and Ruth. This is going on when Eglon is king of Moab and Ehud was the judge, which is quite possibly my favorite one of the judges. Pastor and I Monday were talking about the book of Judges a little bit, and some of the judges were just spectacular. It's just, you have Jael with the tent spike. Her husband isn't getting the job done, taking care of the enemy, so she tricks the enemy into hiding in her tent, gets him to take a nap, and then drives a tent spike with a hammer through the guy's temples. I mean, this is some kind of lady right there, So you have Jael, and you have Gideon, who, a whole battle where God finds him in hiding, and he makes excuse after excuse of why God's found the wrong person, because he's the youngest one from the smallest family, from the smallest tribe, and I'm not the right one, and then made God prove himself to him multiple times. After all that, he led the army that God had narrowed down to incredibly small, led them into what looked like impossible odds, but God led them to a great victory. And others, I'm not going to take the time to list all of the judges, but if you were going to rank the judges, Ehud and Eglon has to be in my list right at the top. Ehud goes in with a message to the king in a way that the king thinks, oh, this is a secret. I have to send everyone out of my room so he can just tell me. But Ehud was sent of God to kill Eglon. I am going to wind up mixing those names up. If I do, just know one is the king and one is the judge, and you can figure out which one's which. Anyways, king sends him out. He pulls a knife and stabs the king. Bible says that the king, again, a guy, it's just great. The king was so fat, the Bible talks about that the knife sunk completely in. There's no knife left. And then, again, a guy, he sneaks out, so the guards thought the king was going to the bathroom, and they didn't want to bother him while he was going to the bathroom. And by the time they decided he must not be going to the bathroom, the judge was long gone. That is just a great story. It's just a great story. But this is the time when you have King Eglon and the judge Ehud. This is the time that Naomi and Ruth are living in Moab under King Eglon. In a time that if you look back at Judges chapter 3, when King Eglon is the king of Moab, the Bible tells us that Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, that they forgot their God, and that they served false gods. This is not exactly a high time for the nation of Israel that Naomi and Ruth are living in. Not exactly a great time where they're going to be, proud of their heritage right now. The time they lived, their nation is doing evil in the sight of God, have forgotten their God, and are serving false gods. Bible doesn't tell us much about Naomi's husband, Elimelech. Bible doesn't tell us whether he was one who had gone and served other gods. If he was one of them that had forgot God, we don't know. But we do know that he and his wife, their 2 sons, go to Moab, where their 2 sons marry Moabite women. And while there, Elimelech dies, and so do their sons. And I know the Bible tells us they've been here in Moab for a while. It talks about for 10 years. But even still, Naomi has lost all her family in a strange land. Remembering that if this is in the time of Eglon, probably not under the best of conditions. So she makes the decision to return. Now, I said most of the message I want to focus on Ruth. And this is where I said my message feels disconjointed, because I really would like to preach a message, and God would not give me liberty to do this. I really would like to preach a message on Ruth, or on Naomi, and then another one on Ruth. So I'm going to, in the introduction, give you super fast version of the one on Naomi, and then the message is going to be on Ruth. Because I think it's worth taking a few minutes to see the choice made by Naomi, this decision to return. Naomi's decision, her choice was not made because of the current climate. Nowhere in the Bible does it tell us that she makes the decision to go back home due to the political condition of Moab, though we probably would have understood. Again, if she's in the time where most scholars think, in between Judges 3 and 4, this would be a rough time to live in Moab. Naomi, though, was not running from Moab because she didn't like the king. She wasn't running from Moab because of persecution or any of those sorts of things. I want to be careful how I say this because I know it could be taken wrong, and I want to be careful how I say this because I don't mean for it to be taken wrong. I understand there can be legitimate reasons to move away, but I'll just say this straight out and go from there. If a person's reason for leaving where God has them is because they don't like the political climate of that place, they're leaving for the wrong reason. I have a friend who this last year, he was here in Washington, and he sold everything he had here in Washington and moved out of state. And his reason was, I just can't stand the state anymore. The government here, I can't take it anymore. So left where God had placed him to flee the state. It's the wrong reason. Naomi's choice wasn't based off the current political climate. You can't read Ruth chapter 1 and anywhere find anything in that tells me Naomi left because she didn't like the king. Naomi's choice wasn't based off of family. Again, I don't think anyone would have blamed her. She had just lost her husband and her 2 sons here. We would all have said, hey, it makes sense for her to move back to where she came from so she can be closer to family. I mean, that would make sense to us in a time like this where she's lost her husband and she's now lost her sons. She's going to need comfort. I can't, and I'm being very sincere with this, I can't imagine how hard this would be. The way the Bible has it written, I believe there is, it's pretty obvious there is a period of time between when she loses her husband and her sons. But a period of time or not, this is hard. Parents aren't supposed to bury their children. As a dad, I can't even imagine how hard this would be, let alone she had already buried her husband and now both of her children. This lady has already been widowed and gone through the pain of that, and now having to bury her 2 sons, and other than her daughters-in-law, has no one to help her, no one to comfort her. So it would have made sense to us if this decision was to move closer to family, but Naomi's decision wasn't based on family. The Bible tells us her decision was based on God. Look at verse 6 with me one more time. Chapter 1, verse 6. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab. Listen, it tells us right here why. For she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. Naomi decided to go back because the Lord had visited. She decided to go back because the Lord had visited his people. Just super straightforward here. As a Christian, this is the only thing that should move us from where God has us. I have in my notes, I have this is a return, not a retreat. This wasn't Naomi had a rough go of things in Moab. She did. But this wasn't that she had a rough go of things and had lost her family, so she's retreating to the safety of home. No, those things had happened, but she wasn't retreating to safety. She was returning to where God was. She was returning for the right reasons. Now, all of that said, we get to where Ruth comes in. That was the pre-message. We'll call it that. That was the pre-message. Now we'll get to where we're going to really focus tonight. Get to where Ruth comes in. Naomi's ready to go where God is visiting, and in her mind, she's going alone. In her mind, she's going to leave everything she has in Moab, and she's going home alone. But as she goes, her daughters-in-law follow. And once told they don't have to, Orpah returns home, but Ruth decides to stay with Naomi. She tells her, where you go, I go. And again, we're finally getting to the message. I've titled message number 2 tonight, Faithfulness Over Freedom. Ruth had the opportunity to go back to her family, back to her home multiple times. What Naomi told Ruth was to go to the, now I lost that word, I think it was her mother's house, to go back home, go back to what she knew, remembering Ruth has just suffered the loss of her husband also. Naomi has lots of reason to grieve, but so does Ruth. She had a reason to want to return home to family. But she chose instead to remain with Naomi. And I see a few things, 2 different things that are in that decision by Ruth that I want us to look at tonight. The first is Ruth chose service over self. She chose service over self. Look at verse 16 and 17 with me. Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. As I just said, Ruth had every right to want to focus on self right here. She had every right to want to focus on herself. She had just lost her husband. That's going to take some time to process. I mean, that would take some time to grieve, and it would have made perfect sense to us had she stayed home. Orpah stayed home, and I believe was completely right in doing so. It's not as if Bible doesn't anywhere make it clear that Ruth did right and Orpah did wrong in the fact that she went home. I want to clarify that. Ruth had every right to want to take time to stay home and grieve, but instead she chose service over self, meaning she followed Naomi rather than her own desires. Naomi laid it out very clearly. Told her, go to your mother's home, go back to your gods. Told her, I have no more sons, go home, get married. She understood the culture of the day, the importance that was put on being married, and especially on having children. Naomi understood that and encouraged Ruth to go home and find a husband. But rather than seeking what she may have desired, she chose to follow Naomi. She sought Naomi's good rather than her own. She focused on Naomi's need rather than her own. There are some people that are just that way. It's how they deal with things, any difficult things. They deal with it just by burying themselves, if you will, in service. They just kind of, they immerse themselves in serving and in doing things. This is a hard thing that is being dealt with, and rather than focusing on loss, and rather than focusing on pain or the struggle that they are in, some focus on serving other people. Now, I know everyone deals with loss differently, and I don't even want to imply that this is how a person ought to deal with loss. So please don't take it that way. But I am saying in general that we ought to have an attitude of seeking to serve others rather than serve ourselves. The idea of serving others over self is completely foreign today. Because if we're just, going to be super blunt, we're selfish. We are. As in general, we're selfish, and selfishness causes all sorts of issues. You can look at selfishness causes strife at home. It's common that we have issues at home with our kids and our family, and it often comes to that we are selfish. Having a family requires sacrifice. But so many people want I guess you could say, the benefits of family without the sacrifice of family. So they have kids, and then the parents are constantly upset because, well, I can't do the things that I did before, and I can't have the hobbies I had before, and if they do, they're neglecting the kids in the process of it. And so you wind up with all sorts of strife because they're selfish. Being selfish causes broken marriages. Almost, and I know I can't say every, but almost every broken marriage could be attributed to one or both parties, and probably both parties being selfish. It really is that simple. When I give pre-marriage counseling, I learned this from my dad. I tell couples, expect to give 100% and the other person to give 0. Expect to give everything you have and to be selfless. That you're going to be selfless and they're going to be completely selfish and give nothing. And if both people will do that, will go into a marriage thinking, I'm giving everything, they're giving nothing, both people are going to be really happy. Because even if the person doesn't give everything, they're going to give more than nothing. But where marriages struggle is one or both are selfish, and then the other gets selfish because, well, I have to work at this, and they aren't. Selfishness is the cause of many broken marriages. Selfishness causes, very often in churches, can cause divisions and even as far as splits, because it's all about I. I didn't get what I want, or I'm not happy with this, so I'm going to make sure it's known, and we're so focused on I that we destroy the unity of we. Selfishness causes struggles in the workplace. Again, focused on I, and I want, and I think, and that causes division. When I was a kid, I don't have any idea where the first place I heard this was, but when I was a kid, I heard it put this way: joy is Jesus, others, yourself. You want joy in your life? Put yourself last. It's the opposite of what we think. We think if I want to be happy, what will make me happy is me. It's what our mind tells us is if I want to be happy, the way to do that is to do everything I want. But it's wrong. You want joy? Put Jesus first, others, and then you last. That's service over self. Service over self. Ruth chose service, staying with Naomi, over herself. Second thing I want us to see, Ruth chose God over the gods. Verse 16, it says, Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest I will go, and where thou lodgest I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people. Now notice this last phrase, and thy God, my God. If you remember, back earlier in the chapter, when Naomi is telling her and Orpah to go home, she mentions, go home to your mother's house and to your gods. Remember, Ruth is a Moabite. Moabites historically served many gods. You look back in the time of Judges, Judges chapter 3, where, again, they believe this falls in the middle of Judges chapter 3. Bible tells us that the people had left God to serve the gods of the land, of the Moabites, and it lists Balaam and the groves. Balaam is another name for Baal that we see over and over in the Bible. The god Baal was, every time I looked it up again today, it's the wackiest looking critter you've ever seen that looks like kind of almost half man with a head of a bull and, I don't know, weird thing with its arms out and a fire in its belly. And they'd put a fire in its belly and lay their babies on its outstretched arms. If the baby rolled into the fire, then it was a sacrifice to their god. If not, then you got to raise your kid. I mean, this is the god that they served. He was said to be the god of life. The groves that it talks about is where they would have worshipped the goddess Ashtoreth. Historically, the main god of the Moabites was, and I'm probably saying this wrong, but was Chemosh, known as the destroyer. I think this is so funny. The destroyer, the subduer, or the fish god. I can't, Brother Unger, maybe you can help me with this. I don't know how destroyer, subduer, and fish god comes out to the same thing, but that's who they mainly worshipped. was going to say, the way you and I fish together, maybe actually that does make some sense, because we tend to get destroyed by the fish when we go out there. It's sad. But I don't know. But all of these gods are the ones the Moabites would have worshipped. So for Ruth, that's who she would have been used to worshiping. That's the gods that her family would have served. So this concept of I will make your God my God is not an easy decision. That's a choice to leave what she knew to follow God. To leave what she knew and what she was used to follow God. I just want to say this right off the bat with this point. That's a really hard thing to do. To leave what you know and what you're comfortable with to follow God. It's a hard thing to do, but it's exactly what God requires of us. Think of the disciples. When Jesus finds the disciples, tells them to follow him, they leave everything they know, their comfort zone. Think of the ones in the ship with their father, mending the nets, and they leave their father and their ship and their boat and their nets. They leave all of that to follow him. Can you imagine how hard that must have been? Often I think we kind of graze over that because we're focused on the ministry of Christ, understandably. But can you imagine how hard that must have been? This is their family. This is their livelihood. I would assume this is their family business. It wouldn't have been easy to walk away from that to follow Jesus, but it's exactly what he required of them. If you're going to follow God, it requires that we leave the things of this world and the things that we know, the things that we are comfortable with, that we leave them behind. She chose God over the gods. It's a choice to leave the gods of this world and follow God. Again, not an easy choice to make. Ruth chose to leave the gods of the world, the gods she knew, and follow the one true God. It's a choice. This choice she made is a choice to choose personal over plural. They would have served many gods. I find it awesome the way this is written. Ruth says, your God will be my God. My God. She could have said, I'll go with you and I'll serve your God. For someone who is used to serving many gods, that wouldn't have been a hard thing. Okay, I'm used to, I'll serve, 4 different gods over here, or I can serve your God there. Sure. But she doesn't say, I'll serve your God with you. She could have had the mentality that if that's what Naomi wants, then I'll serve her God with her. That's what you see a lot of times. Kids will do that their parents come to church and their parents serve God, so they have the mentality, well, if that's what the parent wants, so they follow. But it's not their God. Honestly, it's what a lot of regular church people do. It's what their church wants, but it's not their God. Ruth doesn't say, though, I'll serve your God. She says, your God will be my God. Amen. Your God will be my God. Now, I know, someone could argue it's just a matter of wording, but I don't think so. I think we can see by the character of Ruth here on out, and by the testimony of Ruth beyond this point, that Ruth chose to make the relationship with God personal. This wasn't her mother-in-law's relationship with God. This was hers. From this point on, this was not Naomi's God. Amen. This was my God. Amen. That's a huge difference. That's a huge difference. If it's just the God of someone else, it will never mean much to you. If it's, for Ruth, if it was just Naomi's God, it would have never meant anything to her. Meant anything? That wasn't right. It's a huge step when it goes from your God to my God. If it's just the God of someone else, it'll never stick. You have to choose that he's your God. That it's personal. I mentioned that with teens. With kids, I can't tell you the amount of times I have out in the teen building brought messages to our teens about that if this is just what mom and dad do, it's not going to last. Because there has to come a point for kids and adults alike, for any Christian, that we decide He is my God. It's not the God of my parents. It's not the God of my pastor. It's not the God of my, whoever else. He's my God. You have to choose that He's your God. Now, conclusion this evening. Ruth had some extremely difficult decisions to make. She really did. Service or self. And then the decision of the one true God or the gods of this world. Let me tell you something. Those two decisions are decisions that you and I have to make. They're decisions you and I have to make. Am I going to choose to serve others, or am I going to choose to serve myself? When we choose to serve self is when we lose focus of what this place is for. When we choose to serve self is when we start to see church as, well, what can it offer to me? And when we start to serve self is when we start to view Christianity in the light of, well, what can it benefit me? But it's not about you. Choose service rather than self. And we're faced with, am I going to choose the one true God or the gods of this world? I believe it was last week, I think it was last Wednesday, that I pointed out some of the gods of this world that we can so easily become distracted by. And rather than becoming distracted by the gods of this world, let's make sure our relationship is personal with the one true God, so that you can confidently say, no, He is my God. And let's leave the gods of this world to serve the God. In my mind, as I was studying for this, I don't remember how many weeks ago now it was that we were in Joshua, but as I study this and thinking about this point specifically, my mind just kept going back to Joshua. Choose this day who you'll serve. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you'll use this message in us, Lord. Some choices that have to be made. Lord, help us to tonight, as is said in Joshua, choose this day. Lord, help us to tonight see as we can see in Ruth that she chose service over self. She realized that serving Naomi was more important than herself. And she chose you over the gods of this world, over the gods of her fathers. She made it personal. Lord, I pray that you'll help us tonight, Lord. If there's one here tonight that it's not personal, Lord, help them to take that step tonight. Pray this in your name. Amen. Let's all go ahead and stand with heads bowed and eyes closed tonight.